He was driving home after a long day, wearing his uniform beneath a simple jacket. The city lights bounced off his black luxury car, a reward for years of sacrifice and service. But to one cop that night, all he saw was a black man who didn't belong behind that wheel. The flashing red and blue lights tore through the calm. The questions, the suspicion, the disrespect. He stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of restraint, because what that officer didn't know was that the man he just stopped was Colonel David Miles, one of the most powerful men in the country, a war hero who fought for the very freedom that cop took for granted. Before you judge someone by their skin, learn their story. Because respect should never depend on color, only on character. Subscribe now for more powerful real-life stories that open hearts and change minds. It was late evening. Downtown traffic hummed like a restless heartbeat, neon reflections dancing across the wet asphalt. Colonel David Miles had just left a veteran's ceremony, his medals tucked neatly inside his coat pocket. He wasn't looking for attention. He never did. His car, a sleek black Aston Martin, wasn't a trophy. It was a gift from the Defense Department after decades of service. A symbol of gratitude for a man who led troops through chaos, who carried his men out of fire and never once left a soldier behind. But as he turned down Oak Ridge Boulevard, flashing lights erupted in his rearview mirror. A police cruiser, siren blaring. At first, David thought there must be some mistake. He pulled over calmly, hands resting on the wheel, the same way he'd taught his cadets years ago. Stay calm, show respect, live through it. The officer stepped out, young, rigid, nervous. His eyes didn't see a hero. They saw a stereotype. He barked orders, license and registration, his tone sharp and heavy with authority. David complied, his movements slow, deliberate. Then came the comments. Nice car. Didn't think you people drove these. A smirk. A flashlight beam through the window. David stayed silent, not because he couldn't speak, but because he'd learned that some battles weren't fought with weapons. They were fought with patience and dignity. But the irony burned inside him. He had worn the uniform of his country, defended its honor, and now, in the land he served, he was treated like a suspect for simply existing in success. What that young cop didn't know was that his suspect held more power, courage, and honor than he could ever imagine. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that made time slow down. Colonel David Miles kept his hands on the steering wheel, the red and blue lights flashing across his face like a silent warning. The officer's hand rested near his holster, his words sharp. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." David did as instructed, his calmness almost unsettling. He had seen chaos before. Explosions, gunfire, men screaming for help. But this was a different kind of battlefield. "Mind telling me where you got this car?" the cop asked, circling the Aston Martin like a predator. David's voice was steady. "It's mine." The officer chuckled. "Oh, I bet it is." He reached for the radio, muttering something about possible Grand Theft Auto. David's jaw tightened. He could feel the sting, not from the accusation, but from what it meant. Years of service, countless sacrifices, yet still, he was invisible. To this young man, he wasn't a hero. He was just a black man in a luxury car. Passers-by began to slow down, watching the scene unfold. Some took out their phones, filming. David stood still, every muscle restrained. Inside, his mind raced. Back to the deserts of Iraq. The mission that earned him the Medal of Valor. He remembered pulling a wounded soldier from a burning Humvee, his hand shaking, his uniform scorched. That day, nobody asked about his color. They only saw his courage. Now, standing on a quiet American street, courage was the only thing keeping him from breaking. "Hands on the hood," the officer snapped. David hesitated. "Officer, I'm a retired colonel with the U.S. Army. I can show you my—" "I said hands on the hood." The command cut through the night. David slowly complied, the cold metal against his skin. Another patrol car arrived. A second officer stepped out, older, more composed. His eyes shifted between David and his partner. Something didn't sit right. "What's going on here, Lewis?" the older cop asked. "Possible stolen vehicle. Drivers resisting. David turned his head slightly. Resisting? I've done everything you asked. The senior officer took a closer look at David. His uniform might have been replaced with a suit, but the bearing, the discipline, was unmistakable. Sir, do you have identification? David nodded toward his coat pocket. Left side. The officer retrieved his wallet, flipping it open. His eyes froze. The ID read, Colonel David Miles, United States Army. RT. A small photograph of him standing beside the president was tucked inside. The officer's face went pale. He stepped back. Lewis, put your weapon down. But Lewis wasn't listening. His pride, mixed with fear, was louder than reason. You believe that fake ID? He snapped. David finally turned to face him, his voice deep but calm. Son, I've buried men who fought for this country. Men who never came home. I've seen things you can't imagine. Don't make this worse than it already is. The older cop stepped in front of David, raising a hand toward his partner. That's enough. But Lewis's temper boiled over. No, it's not enough. People like him what? The older cop interrupted. Saved your freedom, kid. Show some respect. For a long moment, silence filled the street. The only sound was the hum of engines and the faint murmur of bystanders. Lewis lowered his hand. His breath trembled, the reality finally sinking in. He had humiliated a man who had served with honor. A man whose name was written in military history. David didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. The older officer turned toward him. Colonel, I'm deeply sorry for this. I'll make sure this is handled properly. David gave a faint nod. You can't fix what's broken, officer. You can only choose not to repeat it. Then, without another word, he got back into his car. As he drove away, his reflection caught in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, worn soul. He whispered softly to himself, This is the country I fought for. Maybe one day it'll fight for me too. Colonel David Miles drove into the night, the road ahead shimmering under the glow of streetlights. The city skyline rose in the distance, cold, indifferent. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than before. Every word, every insult echoed inside his head like gunfire in an empty hall. But deep down, he wasn't angry for himself. He was angry for every man and woman who wore the uniform, and still got treated like they didn't belong. The next morning, news broke out across the country. A passerby's video had gone viral. Decorated Black Army colonel harassed by cop. Millions had seen it. The internet exploded. Some were outraged, others defensive. Hashtags flooded social media. Talk shows debated it. Reporters camped outside his quiet suburban home. David didn't want attention. He wanted change. Then came the phone call. From the Pentagon. Colonel Miles, the voice said. We've seen the footage. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet you. Within hours, David found himself walking through the marble halls of Washington, D.C., past walls lined with portraits of men in power. The place smelled of politics and silence, the kind of silence that hides truth. He entered a vast conference room. Cameras were rolling. Reporters waited. At the far end sat the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff, and the same police chief whose department had embarrassed the nation. Colonel Miles, the Secretary began. On behalf of the Department of Defense, we want to apologize for what happened. You served your country with honor, and you deserve our respect. David's eyes didn't move. Respect isn't what I need, sir. Accountability is. The room went still. He stood tall, like he did on battlefields, and spoke not as a victim, but as a soldier. When I led men into war, we didn't look at color, rank, or politics. We looked at who stood beside us when bullets flew. But here, back home, I'm stopped for driving a car I earned, accused of being a thief in the country I bled for. His voice rose, echoing through the chamber. You say you respect soldiers, but do you see them when the uniform comes off? Or are we only heroes until we become suspects? The reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. Every word was a strike, not of anger, but of truth. The secretary shifted uncomfortably. Colonel, I assure you, disciplinary action will be taken. David shook his head. Sir, this isn't about one officer. It's about a system that teaches fear before understanding. If we don't change that, this badge, this flag, this oath, all of it loses meaning." He paused, letting the silence sink in. Then he reached into his jacket and placed something on the table. His Medal of Valor. "I didn't earn this for myself," he said quietly. "I earned it for the promise that we are one nation, under God, indivisible. But if that promise is broken, then this medal means nothing." Gasps filled the room. The secretary's face hardened. "Colonel, please. That medal is a symbol of courage." David looked him straight in the eye. "Then have the courage to fix what's wrong." That line, "have the courage to fix what's wrong," hit the world like lightning. Within hours, it was everywhere. Colonel Miles trended across every platform. Schools, military academies, and even police departments began quoting his words in meetings. A week later, the same officer, Lewis, requested to meet him privately. David agreed. They met at a quiet park, the kind where truth didn't need microphones. Lewis stood awkwardly, his head low. "Sir, I came to say I'm sorry. I was wrong. I judged you before I even knew your name." David studied him for a long moment. "You know, son, wars don't just happen overseas. They happen here, inside us. The fight between what we're taught and what's right. I hope you win yours." Tears welled in Lewis's eyes. He nodded, unable to speak. David placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not out of pity, but forgiveness. Do better. That's all the apology I need." The wind rustled through the trees as they stood there. A soldier and a cop, two men from different battles, finally on the same side. For the first time in years, David smiled. He knew the war wasn't over, but maybe, just maybe, he had started something worth fighting for. Weeks had passed since that moment in the park, but the echoes of Colonel David Miles's words refused to fade. His face, calm, resolute, dignified, had become a symbol across America. Students quoted him in classrooms. Soldiers mentioned him in training halls. Churches, community centers, and even police precincts played his speech during morning briefings. And yet, David never wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted his country to live up to its promise. One evening, as the sun melted behind the city skyline, David sat on his porch sipping black coffee. The world outside was quiet, but his mind was a battlefield of memories, the kind that left scars no one could see. A knock at the door broke the silence. When he opened it, a group of young cadets stood there in uniform. Their leader, a tall black woman with clear, proud eyes, saluted sharply. "Colonel Miles, sir," she said. "We're from the academy in Georgia. We just wanted to thank you. Because of what you did, our training now includes mandatory community courses on empathy, equality, and leadership. You changed something real, sir." David blinked slowly, the weight of their words sinking deep. "I didn't do it alone," he said softly. "I just told the truth." The cadet smiled. Sometimes that's all it takes. One voice loud enough to wake the rest. They left, and David watched them go, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long time, hope felt heavier than pain. Across town, Officer Lewis stood in front of a small crowd at the local precinct. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, but his voice carried something new. Conviction. "Months ago, I stopped a man because I thought he didn't belong. Turns out that man had fought for everything this badge stands for. I was wrong. I let fear guide me. But I've learned. Courage isn't pulling the trigger or flashing the lights. Courage is admitting when you're wrong and doing better next time." The room was silent, heavy with respect. Lewis continued, "From today, we start a mentorship program, pairing officers with veterans. Maybe if we listen more, we'll stop judging so fast." His chief nodded with pride. For Lewis, this wasn't redemption. It was rebirth. Meanwhile, David's speech was being shown at a televised event, the National Unity Forum, where leaders from across the country gathered to discuss race, justice, and reform. A journalist asked, "Colonel Miles, what do you hope America learns from your experience?" David stood at the podium, eyes scanning the audience. Soldiers, police, students, politicians, everyday citizens. "I don't want people to feel sorry for me," he began. I want them to look inside themselves. The problem isn't just in our laws, it's in our eyes. We see color before we see character. We see difference before we see humanity. If we can fix that, we can fix anything." He paused, letting the words breathe. Justice doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts in the mirror. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, not the kind born of noise but of truth. Cameras flashed, capturing not just a man but a movement. Later that night, David returned home. The medal he'd laid on the Pentagon table had been mailed back to him with a note from the Secretary of Defense for the courage to fight a war, not on the battlefield, but in the heart of a nation. He held the medal in his hands, the metal cold against his skin. Then he placed it on the mantel beside a photo of his late wife. "You were right, Sarah," he whispered. "One man can make a difference." A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, rustling the flag outside. For a moment, everything was still. Peaceful, proud, alive. In the days that followed, a new awareness swept through communities across America. Police departments invited veterans for joint seminars. Schools added a unit on everyday equality. And in homes across the country, parents told their children about the man who stood tall not because he was a soldier, but because he was human. Weeks later, David visited the same street where it had all begun, the same intersection where he was pulled over for driving too nice a car. He parked for a moment, stepped out, and looked around. The same sky, the same wind, but something felt different. Maybe the world hadn't changed completely, but maybe people had started to see. A little boy on a bike stopped beside him. "Hey, mister," the boy said. "You're that soldier from TV, right? My mom says you made people kinder." David smiled. "Nah, kid. People made themselves kinder. I just reminded them they could." The boy grinned and rode away. David looked up at the open sky and exhaled deeply, the kind of breath that feels like freedom. His voice, calm and steady, seemed to echo across time. True power isn't in rank, money, or medals. It's in doing what's right when nobody's watching. The camera slowly pans out, showing David walking back toward his car, the American flag waving softly in the background, not as a symbol of perfection, but of progress. In a world full of titles and uniforms, may we never forget, humanity comes first.